Well, hello, everyone. Thank you for taking time to be with us today. A few things before we get started. Number one, all of your audio is muted right now. And what we're going to ask you to do is in the bottom right, if you've got it turned on, you should be able to turn on your chat box. Shoot us questions as we go through this. If you've got any comments, please add them in there. And what I will be doing is working with Shelley to try to make sure that we answer every question you have, and these are going to be recorded for posterity, so we'll get back to you. To serve you better, we are keeping the camera company open from 10 to 4 daily for phone calls. You can call in. If you need something, we are shipping out any order over $50 for free. So Monday through Saturday, 10 to 4, the phones will be answered, and we can also arrange for curbside pickup. I think Shelley's going to talk a little bit about some products that you might consider using when you're doing some bird photography, and we want to be there to support you and help you out, and we really are thankful that you guys are here today and supporting your local stores. Shelley Preston from Olympus is with us today, and it kind of flashes back between Shelley and I here a couple times, but Olympus is going to, Shelley's going to be talking about bird photography settings for your camera and how to take some better photographs. So without further ado, I'm going to mute myself and turn it over to you, Shelley.
Thank you. Dave, I think there are still people in the waiting room. Do you see that on my end? It says 23 people or, oh, cool. Looks like everybody is showing up now. Cool, well, thank you, Dave, and thank you, Camera Company, for hosting this platform for us to all come together. I am going to tell you about bird photography today. A lot of what I've learned is through my career at Olympus and my colleagues, who I will also talk about. And I'm very well aware that there's not one and only one way to do something correctly. These are just kind of some guidelines to go by and suggestions to try out. And I do work for Olympus. I think that our gear is absolutely wonderful for bird photography, but that doesn't mean that this is just an Olympus only, discussion or anything like that. I don't want to exclude anybody, but I will talk a little bit about some of our features that are exclusive to Olympus. But just if you don't shoot Olympus, hang tight, and we'll talk about other things too. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with you guys. So I'll go through a PowerPoint just to kind of keep me on task, and you can see some of the things that I'm talking about as well. So, let's see. All right. Okay, cool. So you should be seeing my screen now. So I'm based in Chicago. I cover the Midwest, although I do fly just about anywhere. So you'll find me everywhere. So just a little bit about the way that I've structured this. I'm going to talk a little bit about recommended gear, settings for perched birds and settings for flying birds, and then just some quick tips and tricks for better photos of birds. And I'll have some examples as well. So recommended gear, obviously a camera, a telephoto lens, and the reason I say telephoto is because obviously the birds tend to fly away and they're far away from us. So telephoto lenses bring them closer to us. Teleconverters will also add some distance to that as well. If I put tripod with a gimbal head here for people that don't shoot Olympus, and the reason I say that, you can use a tripod with an Olympus camera, but our stabilization in Olympus cameras is so great that we're kind of freed up to not be restricted with a tripod anymore. The stabilization and the weight of it is so light, you can just carry it around and you get different shots. So, and to the right of here is just kind of an example of a gimbal head. This helps people out it's kind of on a swing kind of thing for heavier gear and to get to move around quickly. I don't personally use one. I just want you to know that those are an option for bird photography, and that could be something that the camera company can help you out with, and also tripods. I know that they have tripods from to fit every kind of budget and style of photography that you need. So recommended gear on my side for Olympus. My first recommendations would be the EM1X and the EM1 Mark III. primarily because of the focus is so quick. And also it has a joystick to move your focus point around, and it gets you where you need to be very quickly. So it could be in the difference between getting the shot and missing the shot. But our other OMD cameras will do a really great job also for bird photography. They just don't have the joystick that I'm talking about. You could program your up, down, left, and right button to activate your focus points, and that also gets you around the screen very quickly. If you're using a group focus point or single focus point, which I will also go over a little bit of. My favorite two lenses to shoot with for birds are our 300 f4 and our 40 to 150 2.8. On our cameras, you would double these numbers for an effective 600 millimeter field of view and 80 to 300 field of view. And then you can also add a 1.4 teleconverter or 2x teleconverter onto both of these lenses to reach even further. And another one that's a very light, compact lens that gets you close to birds is the 75 to 300. I think that's also a great lens to have in your bag. So just a quick overview of some of the advantages that Olympus has for birding is our 5-axis image stabilization. Our new cameras have 7 stops of stabilization, meaning 7 stops of light, and helps you with any kind of handshake that you might have. It works really well. They're also fully weather sealed, starting from our EM5 series up, fully weather sealed with the right lenses with our pro lenses, and some of the other premium lenses are fully weather sealed, meaning you don't have to worry about rain or snow or things like that. You don't have to cover it up with a bag. It will be weather sealed just as it is, and I have tested that, so I can testify against that, or to that that's really true. They are small, lightweight, compact, and portable. I have been so amazed with that I carry around the camera everywhere I go, and I don't feel weighed down and bogged down with heavy gear. Our lenses are incredibly sharp. We've been making glass for 100 years, and it's really a craft. They're really beautiful lenses. We have really customizable settings. So a lot of our cameras have custom settings on the mode dial, which you can program. And also most of our buttons are programmable, so you can really make the camera your own and work to your advantage that way. And 121 cross-type focus points on most of our sensors. So we'll talk a little bit about mode and exposure for perched bird camera settings. So birds that are theoretically staying still, but even when they're perched, they still move pretty quickly. I would say to start out with aperture priority here. Unless you don't feel comfortable there, then you could use program also, and you can still have a little bit of ability to change your settings. I think a lot in terms of manual when I'm bird shooting, and recently I was with a colleague, Steve, in Harlingen, Texas, where there are tons of birds, and we went out shooting, and he told me how he was shooting. He was shooting with aperture priority, and I changed my mode dial to aperture priority and started shooting that way, and it changed my world. It was just so much easier, because when you're in aperture priority, you can use the exposure compensation dial to just quickly add or take away light, and that for changing lighting conditions outside and the bird, hopping from branch to branch, the way that the light's coming into the camera changes pretty quickly, even though you might not expect it to. So that's really helpful, and that's how I shoot them now. ISO is going to be dependent on conditions. I would say, outside on a sunny day, anywhere from 200 to 400. A little cloudy, maybe 800. I've gone all the way up to, I've shot birds at 3,200, 6,400. Because a lot of the time, whenever you are shooting birds, it's early morning or evening. It's when they come out to eat or whatever they do. And so high ISO, I wouldn't be afraid to shoot at high ISO. Works great. White balance, I always adjust mine to fit the conditions outside. Sunny, shade, cloudy, works great. White balance auto works really well too, but I prefer to I prefer to change it to match what is outside. So a little bit on autofocus and sensitivity of autofocus. I like to use continuous autofocus when I'm shooting birds. I also would suggest, if you haven't tried back button autofocus, to try that out. I think that works great. It does take a little getting used to though. So, if you have a trip planned in the future, I would definitely, if you're gonna try that, get used to it first before you go on a trip and get frustrated or something, because it just takes a little getting used to. For perched birds, I use single point most of the time, or like a 5-point group. Low burst mode, because even though they are, like I said, theoretically sitting still, they are quickly moving. They have very subtle, quick movements. And the sensitivity is going to depend on the surroundings in the background. And I have some examples here to show you on what I mean about these things. So to get to continuous autofocus in our system, it is in the super control panel, which is accessed by hitting OK. These also can be translated to other cameras. This is just what my screen looks like in Olympus cameras, CAF. You would access it right here. It might also say SAF on your camera, but this is where you change it. So you highlight it, press OK, and then change it from there. Autofocus target setting. So this is what I was talking about when I said single target. There's a small single target and a regular single target. So for something that you're able to get this close to, like this little bird on the right who looks like a good time, you can move your focus point around so that you can put it right on top of the bird's eye and make sure that the eye is in focus. Because, essentially, most of the time whenever you're taking a portrait of a living being, having the eye in focus is really the single most important thing. There are exceptions to every rule, but that's what I would say about that. So an example to use the 5-point group target is when something is a little bit further away and there's a lot of stuff happening around the bird, like branches. Like this one is a bunch of grass and some brush. So you can move that target group around a little bit faster and cover the bird's face with the target point. Burst mode here is where you access it on the super control panel. So the little stacked rectangles, so in low, that's what I would recommend for perched, because you don't want a ton of photos of a perched bird, but they do make the subtle movements like I was talking about. And the benefit to using the low burst mode is if you use that in conjunction with the continuous autofocus, it will re-autofocus in between shots. The silent option is good to use, I think, in a lot of cases, just in case. The noises can scare birds away, especially noises that the birds aren't familiar with hearing. Anything with a heart next to it on our mode is completely silent. It turns on the electronic shutter, so you don't hear anything at all. So earlier I mentioned the continuous autofocus sensitivity, and this is accessed in the menu, not just the super control panel. But you can change your sensitivity so that it's high and low. And examples on where you would use the sensitivity in high and low. If you're shooting birds against a clear blue sky, you would increase your sensitivity to high, because there's not anything that's going to confuse the autofocus, I guess I could say. There's probably a better way to put that, but it's going to lock autofocus on whatever's moving in front of that clear blue sky. So when you would want to use low sensitivity is if the bird is moving in front of something that's like a messy background or noisy background, kind of like the one here. So it will pick up on what's moving and work a little bit better for you there. So one feature that is unique to Olympus cameras is what's called Pro Capture mode. And one place where you might want to use Pro Capture mode is if you wanted to catch a bird launching off of a branch like this one here, because you can't really anticipate when that's actually going to happen. So birds are so quick that even if you're watching it and you're ready to shoot the shutter button, it's going to launch off and you're going to miss the shot. Well, what Pro Capture does is you turn on Pro Capture, and as you hold the shutter button halfway down to autofocus, it's constantly buffering up to 35 frames before you take the shot. So it'll buffer 35 frames and get rid of them constantly until you press the button down. Once you press the button down, it will bank those 35 frames and also take frames afterwards. So in a sense, you know, I've heard it called like going back in time a little bit. So it's a really pretty cool feature. And I will mention that these are also full resolution images and full resolution RAW images if you choose to shoot in RAW. So it's not a scaled down resolution here. It's up to 60 frames per second on high. There's a Pro Capture Low option as well. Okay, so some flying bird camera settings. Like I said earlier, there's not one single perfect way to do this, but here's one way that I do it. I would suggest shooting in shutter priority, because flying birds, we're talking about speed a lot of the time, most of the time, or manual, but shutter priority will help you get the shot because they do move so quickly. And you have the option of using the exposure compensation as well. So you can set your shutter at a place where you know it's either going to stop action or blur action. That's really the key point here is, do you want the wings to be completely frozen or do you want them to show a little motion? And then ISO is also dependent on the conditions. So you could use ISO auto on any of these as well. If it's super bright, sunny outside, you know, 200 is good. So just kind of adjusted based on that. Oh, I accidentally put that in there twice, sorry. Here we go. So to completely freeze the wings of a bird, you would need to use a shutter speed of 1/2500th of a second. And then if you wanted to show motion in wings, somewhere around 1250th to 2000th of a second is a good place to be. I've heard people say, when people are really technical about their photos, that the best way to take a bird photo is have the wings frozen, like stop the motion completely. And that's great, but I personally think that it's great to show motion in a photo. I actually love photos that show motion. It makes me more drawn into it, but that might be a personal opinion there. So everybody has their own opinion, you know. So like this photo, you can see that one of the wings is blurred, and I really think that this is a beautiful photo. So, and the shutter speed here was 1/1250th of a second. And here, a photo of a hummingbird. Hummingbirds move so fast, you guys know that. So this was at 1/800th of a second, taken by Steve. He's the one that I've shot next to and learned so much from. He's absolutely wonderful if you ever get to hear him talk about it. So this one has blurred wings, which I think is absolutely fantastic. I wouldn't want the bird's wings to be completely frozen here because it shows motion, and everything else is super crisp and sharp here. So this was taken with the 300 f4, which is an absolutely beautiful lens, and the 1.4 teleconverter. One of the sharpest lenses I've ever shot with in my life. So here's kind of an example of why exposure compensation is important if you're using like aperture priority program or shutter priority. You can't, because you never know if a bird, say, has, like a bald eagle, has a white feathers on his head and brown feathers down below. It's hard to really truly expose for that. And it also depends on what the background looks like, whether it's white or light or dark. So you can quickly use your exposure compensation just by rolling the front dial to add or take away light until what you see is what you want to capture. And I also could have mentioned a long time ago, just in case people don't have experience with mirrorless cameras. Mirrorless cameras, what you see is what you get. So when you use the exposure compensation, you're going to see that in your viewfinder or on the back of the LCD screen, exactly what that exposure compensation is doing to your photo. And this here is, it's just a funny example of to not be afraid to shoot in higher ISO. You know, when you're shooting birds, I think the most important thing is to capture them. So if you truly want to freeze the wings, then the most important thing in your exposure triangle is going to be your shutter speed, because we're talking about time. So you can boost up your shutter or your ISO to compensate for that higher shutter speed. Cameras these days are so good at high ISOs that you don't really have to worry about that. So autofocusing for flying birds, I would suggest continuous autofocus or continuous autofocus tracking. In my opinion, I have had better luck with continuous autofocus versus the tracking, just because the birds move so fast. Whenever you're using tracking, once the bird leaves the frame, it no longer tracks it, so you have to continually change that. There could be a better way to do that, but that's my experience. I think that they both work really well. I think that part is just trying to get used to using that. Also, 9 group or the all target works really well for flying birds. Low burst mode, high burst mode, and pro capture works really great as well. So to change it to continuous autofocus or continuous autofocus tracking is also in the super control panel right here. I've highlighted CAF. You could click OK on here and then change that to tracking if you want to try out tracking. This photo right here is a good example of why you would want to use the 9 group, because you could move that target right over the eagle's face very easily instead of just using the all target and it potentially focusing on the tail there, because there's a lot of the same kind of color going on in that photo. This is, we saw this picture earlier, but this is also a good example of where you would want to use all target, because it is a clean background and it's the all target is going to detect that motion instantly and focus exactly on those birds. So pro capture, a little bit more on this. So pro capture is great to use for flying birds if you know that they're like fishing, which is so fun to watch. I'm sure that if you guys are interested in birds, you watch them fish sometimes. I think it's fascinating. So this is an example of how you could get the absolute most perfect shot. And you would, unless you're just the luckiest person in the world, you might not ever get that shot without pro capture, because you're taking photos in a sequence and you're actually taking photos before you press the shutter button completely down, like when the action happens. So then you can just choose the right one that you want to keep and delete the rest. Pro capture is listed here in the super control panel, which is also where you access your low burst, your high burst, single, and your silent. There are other settings for pro capture, or you can set different limitations in pro capture. So let's say you wanted to shorten the amount of frames that you take before. Instead of 35, say here you want 14. Well, this is on continuous low, your max frames per second is 18. On the high settings, your max is 60. And then down here is your frame count limiter, which is the total frames you take for that one session of taking the photos. And this little simple diagram down here is something that I'm a very visual person, so it helps me to understand where, how this actually works. So what the little brown dial on this diagram, that represents your shutter button. So that's when you actually press it all the way down. And so the 14 shows, those are the amount of frames that it saves onto your memory card before you press the button down. and then it takes, here the way this one is set up, 11 after you press it down, for a total of 25. So I think the max amount is 99 if you have it on high. I will have to double check that, but I think it's 99. I should have put that in there, sorry. A little thing on tips and tricks for better bird photos, just some things that I've learned along the way to pass along to you. To isolate the background, or isolate your subject as much as you can, to have a clean background and nothing really in front of it. So this barn owl versus I think that's a great horned owl. Please forgive me if I don't say the right name. I'm learning them as I go too. Also clean background. So here you can definitely tell that the background is a little bit more, the contrast in color is different than the bird. So the bird stands out more than the bird on the right, which really kind of blends in. You can tell it's a bird, obviously, but I think it's a better photo whenever you don't have all of the same colors in the same photo. You have different contrasting colors or complementary colors there. And I know that when you're out in nature, you can't just tell the bird to pose for you where exactly you want it. So you can move yourself. You can move yourself around, change your angle, and that will change the background also. Sometimes it's just a few steps. For background, this is very achievable by manipulating your aperture, shooting like f4. Using a telephoto lens, you can blur your background with by backing up and zooming in, but oftentimes you don't have to back up from birds because they're far enough away from you. Filling the frame is another, I would say it might be a little bit more of a creative way. These are very, very close-up photos and they're profile photos. But you get a different, just a different sense of the bird here. Use your surroundings for framing. I shot this, I noticed how beautiful the light was coming through the branches, and I just had to get the shot. But I moved myself several steps to the left so that I could get that kind of framing. And so you can just use your surroundings, use the branches and whatever else is around to create a little frame for your photo. Leading lines. This was taken by another one of my colleagues, Mike Amico, who has great bird work. I love that. I love how he used the lines in this photo. I think it's absolutely gorgeous, the way that it's kind of divided up there. And one other thing to note, it's raining here, or snowing, but I think it was raining. So you can take your camera out in the rain if you're into that kind of thing and not worry about your camera getting ruined. You can actually get some really cool shots by using our weather sealed cameras. Rule of thirds, we're probably all familiar with rule of thirds. So position your subject in the thirds and it makes for a good photo. And so just some final thoughts and other things that I've learned throughout or up to this point, this far. For flying birds, try to capture the wings in an up or down motion instead of just completely straight out. They tend to be a more interesting photo. No pancakes. Capture them in odd numbers. So odd numbers, this is actually a very basic design rule in any kind of art or any kind of creativity. 3 is really the magic number in what makes it an image or any kind of design aesthetically pleasing to the human eye. And I know you can't like tell the birds again to pose, but 3 is just a magic number everywhere, but odd numbers are just aesthetically pleasing. So 5, 7, 9, that kind of thing. Try not to overlap the wings. So if they are flying and you can move yourself in a way that they're not overlapping, that tends to make for a little bit better photo. Remember your composition techniques. Like I said, the rule of third. There are many others like the Fibonacci spiral and things like that. So get creative. I'm a big advocate for creativity and breaking the rules in photography also. So another thing to expect, just to set expectations, is to be really, really patient. sometimes have to sit very quietly in the same place for a very long time for birds to even come to a place where you can photograph. So don't just expect to walk up to a tree and photograph a bird. You can expect to sit there for a while and wait for the bird to come to you. Again, be aware of shutter speed. When you're going into it, know whether you want to freeze the action or show movement. So depending on how you, your style and your taste, I guess, for photography, that's up to you. But now you know what shutter speed works for freezing action and for showing movement, especially with birds. Sun angle, this is something that I learned from one of our visionaries, Scott Bourne. He called it sun angle. I think that that's his term for it, but I think it's a good rule of thumb. What he means by sun angle is to know where the sun is in the sky and put your back to it so that that sun is going to be shining onto your subject wherever you are, and then create really beautiful light. So I'm not sure about other brands, but I know that a lot of our cameras have the ability to set custom modes like 1, 2, 3, and 4. So I would say put custom 1 perched birds and set all your settings there and program that, and custom 2 maybe for flying birds and set all your settings there so you can switch between them very quickly. Or even set one of them for pro capture so that you can flip it there and you're instantly in pro capture, and then you can turn it off very quickly also so that you don't have billions and billions of photos. So this is something that I could recommend to anybody who is stuck at home and wants to get outside in their backyard and shoot. This is my colleague Steve Ball came up with this idea. And so this is a picture of his backyard. And he put a blue background on his fence and built a perch there and can shoot. So the idea here is I have heard people don't like bird photos of them at a feeder because it's like cheating or something. But I'm not too terribly picky about that. I think bird feeder photos are just fine, but this is a way to get around that so that you have a nice, clean, pretty blue background, or you could choose any kind of background, but this blue turns out to look like a sky. So here are some of the pictures that Steve's taken with that, and works really great. You have a nice, clean background, and it's all set up in your backyard. So that is everything that I have for you guys today. Shop local, support your local companies, and thank you for listening to me. And if you have any questions, let me check the chat here. Let's see. Okay, so I have a few questions here. What's a teleconverter? A teleconverter is a piece of equipment that goes in between your camera and your lens to create more distance for you so that you can reach a further distance. It's limited to certain lenses. It will only work with certain lenses, but generally with our brand, there's 1.4 teleconverter, so you multiply your distance by 1.4, and a 2 times teleconverter, so you multiply your distance by 2 times. And so it gets you more reach. And, oh, I just realized that Steve answered that question. And sorry, so in a really good way. Increases the magnification of the lens. It's a good way to put it. Let's see. Back button autofocus. So back button autofocus is a way to, instead of focusing with your shutter button halfway down, you can focus, you can program a button on the back of your camera to focus on the back, like pressing the back button and still using the shutter button to take the picture. And the advantage to using that is you can press and hold the back button autofocus and it locks your focus, and you can quickly snap your photo instead of the camera re-autofocusing every time you press the shutter button halfway down. It does take a little getting used to, like I said earlier. So there's a question. Okay, that was answered. Yeah, does TG6 have Pro Capture? Yes, it does. Steve answered it. Thank you, Steve. Any tip for compensating for aspect ratio, making for better enlargement? I'm not exactly sure what you mean by this. Oh, hold on. Like, I know that there has been issues in the past with your ratio of your sensor being completely different than standard size prints. Like, say, like if you were, the first example that comes to mind, if you're shooting with 35mm film, that ratio is a 3:2 ratio, which is essentially printable as an 8:12. So you would have to cut off 2 inches of that to get that same ratio. So I guess my best advice, without knowing exactly how to answer this question, is to, it looks good. Oh, so you'd have to crop it. Maybe leave yourself a little room to crop outside, and then whenever you do crop, keep the rule of thirds in mind, so that, or if you're, yeah, just, when shooting flying birds, are you hand holding? I am always hand holding my camera. I never use a tripod because our stabilization is so good, and I don't want to carry on a tripod. I think that there's a time and a place for it, but I guess I just am a little stubborn that way. So I do use a tripod. I have one right here that I use all the time. But if I'm walking around shooting birds, my stabilization is just, it does everything I need it to. So let's see. Why do I suggest aperture setting versus shutter setting? Well, first, I suggested shutter priority for flying birds. You could also use that for birds, for perched birds. The reason that I suggested it is because my colleagues suggested it to me, and I tried it, and it just worked really well for me. I think whenever you're shooting in photography, there's a lot of people that think in terms of light and depth of field when it comes to creating a photo. So if you're creating a photo, there's the 3 exposures, right? There's ISO, there's aperture, and there's shutter speed. And a lot of people, the first thing they think about is depth of field or aperture, and they can relate better to that. And so I think that it's just a good place to be, and it worked for me. If you think better in time, if you think better in time, then shutter priority might be a better option for you. Like I said, there's no perfect way to do it. So let's see. Can you use focus lock instead of back button? Absolutely. Yes. How about setting manual aperture? Oh yeah, totally. That would be a good, yeah, if you're comfortable with that, using manual mode, shooting aperture or setting your aperture and your shutter and using auto ISO, I think that's a great way to do it also. The only thing there is well, no, that's right. That would work just fine, I think. Yeah. That's the end of the questions. Do you guys have any other questions or comments?
Shelley, thank you so very much for being with us today. And there's some great tips there. I'm hoping everybody goes out and tries a few of these. Now, want to also remind you that this particular seminar session, Zoom meeting, whatever we want to call it in our social distancing society today, will be archived and on our YouTube channel. So go there and you can watch all the other sessions we've done so far. We remind you the store is open from 10 to 4 for phone calls Monday through Saturday. We're also shipping orders out, so if anybody needs anything over $50, we will ship for free. And we can also make for curbside pickup. So if someone needs something right away, we can accommodate you. Now, thank you all for taking time to be with us today. Go out and take some great bird photos. And until next time, remember, check us out on Instagram, like us on Facebook, and subscribe to our YouTube channel, and ring that bell to get notifications when new videos are posted. Thank you all very much. We're going to end the meeting now, and you guys have been great, and we'll see you on the next seminar.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you all.